Hello everyone, Shannon Guss here, getting you ready for another pre-season podcast for Australian Survivor V World on this Australian Survivor World Tour that we are doing for this massive season coming up, deep diving every single player that will play on AUV World. I wanted to let you know, in case you don't know, we do have a date for the season now. It's August 17th, which is a Sunday night in just under a month. Where the season's going to start. We did not have that before, and I haven't mentioned it on the podcast that were recorded before we got that. So I just wanted to put it out there. We do have a date. Very, very exciting. I also just wanted to shout out some of the other podcasts. If you've missed any of them, this is our sixth one of this 14-part series talking about each of the players on the season. But we did Sari. We kicked it off with Sari with Taryn. We talked about Lisa with Mike Bloom, Kirby with Liana, Sarah with Eden, and Rob Bentley with Dino. And now we're doing this. And then we're going to have 8 more players after that. I just finished Survivor Quebec, so we're going to get into that. And now I'm watching Survivor Finland. So we're going to get to all of the players. Hope you've been enjoying this. I also wanted to say, now that we're doing the Luke podcast and this very podcast with Myles, which was really fun, by the way, you're about to hear it. I fully forgot that Luke's Big Brother season was Big Brother VIP and that it was a celebrity season. People who listen to the podcast might know that I like to correct myself in future podcasts if I forget something or make a mistake. And Eden in the Sarah podcast, which actually was recorded after the Luke podcast, I hope you're keeping up. But he was like, wasn't that Big Brother VIP? And I was like, was it? And then I Googled it. And do you know that Meghan Markle's brother and Caitlyn Jenner and Omarosa were on that season? Because I fully forgot. I forgot that he was even a celebrity season, actually. And I fully forgot that those people were on that season. 2021 in lockdown was a wild time. But I'd repressed that. I never watched the season, but I definitely remembered that happening until I didn't. So I just wanted to clarify that. I don't know what that says about Luke's game, if that changes any of how high we are on him, that he won a season like that. As we heard in this podcast, we're very high on Luke's chances, but does that change anything? I don't know, but Amy Chan and Sarah Carradine covered that for RHAP, and I did do my Janine podcast, which is coming out in the future with Amy Chan, and we spoke about it. So more coverage on that to come. Apologies for forgetting, for repressing that happened 4 years ago in the season of Big Brother that Luke won. But I hope you otherwise enjoy this podcast with Myles about Luke. Season coming up, August 17th. 6-1 of this. 8 more to come. Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. Bye. Hello, everyone, and welcome to RHAP's coverage of Australian Survivor V World. I'm your host, Shannon Guss, here for another pre-season podcast. We are going to be talking about someone from the Australian tribe, someone who was the people's champion. He was the first returnee Australian Survivor ever had, and this will be his 3rd time playing. I'm obviously talking about Luke, and to talk about Luke, I thought I got to get in another game player, a super fan of the show, who might be a bit in the chaotic mold. That is Luke. It is the great Myles. Myles, thank you for being here.
Hello. Yeah, very happy to be here. I don't know why you'd suggest that I'm chaotic. I don't know where that reputation has come from, but yeah, I'm very excited to talk about Luke. He's a fun player, obviously, a long history with the game, and yeah, excited. I'm just excited for Australia versus the world, to be honest. I'm coming closer and I'm ready.
Yeah, we don't know when, but it's certainly coming closer. Every day is getting closer technically to AUV World. But yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of there's a lot of deja vu for me, because a lot of the stuff from your season where you're like, oh, that move, taking out PD would be worth even losing the money, or I'll go to rocks and stuff. I'm like, this is Luke. Like, this isn't the Luke DNA of chaos. Like, Luke from the very beginning of when he was playing was like just wanting to cause ties and, you know, create havoc. So I feel like you are a great Luke expert, because you can also talk from a player position of that, like, you know, playing well, but chaotically and having fun. And I feel like those are very much the pillars of Luke.
Yeah, I think like there are obviously some very big differences between our game, but there's a lot of similarities in the core of there are a lot of similarities in the core of someone who is there who wants to break down other people's bonds and then wants to be there and slide in through the cracks in that sort of way, because that is very much his game. Like literally from day one on Asanga, he was on the wrong side of the first vote they were on just because he wanted to kind of throw things a certain way and spook people.
yeah. I mean, it is very interesting, and we'll talk through the trajectories of 2 seasons where he makes it very, very, you know, very fast. So he has like 2 full seasons of the show. He's also played and won Big Brother. He was also on the Traders. I think he and Sari are the only 2 people in the world who have been on the Traders and Big Brother and Survivor. So if they ever get a chance to bond about that, and they won 1 each. So that's something that's very, very interesting. But I do think as I was like going through Luke's games. And again, I haven't seen Big Brother, which is so annoying to me because I feel like it's like the one piece of media I won't have for these players going into the season, but I can't watch the whole of the Big Brother. I'm already watching Survivor Quebec. Okay, it's a lot. But I think that like looking at his history, it really struck me that Luke, I've always thought, has a very innate sense of the game and is a very naturally good player. Chaotic, sure, but very good. But I really feel like he's been getting better and better. Like if you look back at the 2017 season, he definitely has like ups and downs. And it's less refined. And then I think when you look at 2019, there are almost no notes. And if anything, like at times when he's in trouble, it's more like Dave has got them in trouble. He's recovered really well when he's like in those moments, like for example, with Dave being blindsided out from under them. So then to win Big Brother and also be pretty much note perfect on a very frustrating trader season, it just shows me that Luke is not just skilled at the game, but the more he plays these games, the better he gets. And now he's coming back from having played other reality TV. And I do think Luke we're going to see probably the best of what is already a very good player.
Yeah, totally. And I think like because coming into the first season, he wasn't a fan of the show. He hadn't watched Survivor before. I think he said he watched Tony on YouTube beforehand,
he watched Tony,
which is where he got the
YouTube
Spy
clips.
Shack idea from. Yeah, but I definitely think he had he came in and he does have that innate sense of the game and he does have a great social game, but definitely was lacking a bit of that strategic edge of understanding kind of when and where to make the move as opposed to just always wanting to make the move. And you see in 2019, it's a lot more refined where a big thing I think is control, where I think in 2017, he always wants to be in control. All game, he always wants to be the man that's dictating and calling the shots. In 2019, it's really noticeable how willing he is to kind of step back and let other people take control. Whether I think it's David in the first half of the game, and even in the second half of the game, the way after David gets blindsided, that he is able to step back and just reassimilate with the champions, but then also maintain these really strong connections with the contenders that he uses to navigate through later. I don't think that's something that he would have done in 2017. Like I think in 2017, if Dave Gennet gets blind, first of all, I don't think in 2017 he's ever seen as the number 2, where in 2019 he was the number 2 to David. And then I think in a world where his number 1 gets blindsided, I think he's back on the warpath in 2017. But in 2019, instead, he just stepped back a little bit, was biding his time and then just repositioned and was in excellent position and then was able to kind of shake up the game a bit the way he did. So it's kind of more tactical shakeups versus just constantly shaking everything until it all falls apart.
Yeah, well, to be fair, I mean, yes, he's a second to Dave, but also there's not a lot of people like Dave. Like that might say more about David than it does about Luke. But I do think him being a very like symbiotic partnership that works and they're not just like scrambling for control speaks to how he kind of allowed that to happen. So I would agree with you. I do think looking at his whole trajectory, if we're going to start kind of at the end before the beginning, a lot of that second half of Champions v Contenders is some of the most impressive stuff because, when he loses Dave, which again is really like Dave's fault, like Dave had like played so big that he had gotten himself voted out. I don't think I put that on Luke. And he not only, as you said, recovers with the champions, but then he has these other relationships to recover with, having their own group of Abby, Baden, Harry, and himself. We're going to take out some massive players in the game, like Simon, no, I'm joking, like Janine, who's going to be on the season. So we'll talk about Luke's many connections on the season, for better or worse, mostly better. And then to kind of build that all into this really amazing move at the final 5, where he's going to send Baden with an advantage out of tribal council and orchestrate a 2-1-1 vote on Abby, all to take out his biggest challenge competitor. At that point, he's winning challenges as well. I know people criticized him at the time for needing to win, I think it was 3 immunities in a row at the point where he would have, got into the end, it would have been 5 immunities in a row. But for me, I was impressed with it because I think that he came in as this like completely different element. He was the only returning player. He was like such a big threat in that way. And to recover as he did, like, he still made moves. He still had power. And like, yes, he also needed immunity wins, but I feel like he was kind of covering that on every level, like socially, strategically, and physically, until like he ran out of runway because it was so obvious that they had to vote him out because he was so likable and he was like definitely going to win. For me, protecting that with immunities, again, this might be similar to you, like sometimes like if you play that big a game, you have to have other outs of protection. And for a long time, he actually did until he didn't at the final 4.
And it's also about, like, there's a reason why he was able to win so many immunities. And that's because if you look at that season, they took out a lot of the big immunity threats, right? While he didn't have a part in Dave going home, Sean goes home, Daisy goes home, Simon goes home. And then at Final Five, he takes out Abby, who was the biggest immunity threat there. So it was deliberate to take out these other immunity threats to give him the best path to the end. But also, you're right in that I don't really think he had an option at that stage in the game. Like, I think he was at a stage where there wasn't much he could have done. So the best thing he could do was just take out the right people for him to kind of immunity his way to the end, as he did. Yeah, it's really, that's the big question, I guess, that a big Survivor question of to what extent does winning immunities or finding idols or all of that, to what extent does using that to get to the end validate or invalidate your win from a strategic perspective. But I think here it doesn't really invalidate it, in that there's just, like, if you're taking notes on what he could have done to get further in 2019, there's not much he could have really done any better, really. Like, he definitely, it was really noticeable that in 2019, he had much more of a refined sense of the strategy of the game, as in, like, actually running the numbers, looking at the voting blocks and understanding how to kind of swing between effectively. Where in 2017, it seemed kind of just like he always wanted control and it was just making moves for the fun of it. 2019, a lot of the moves that he's making are a lot more strategic. And it's also really noticeable. The other thing that's really awesome in 2019 is his social game is just on an absolutely another level. He's on the bottom. He starts the season on the bottom because he's not in this athletes alliance that is initially dominant on the contender on the champions tribe. Then he gets swapped to an absurd spot where he is one of two people with 6 contenders or whatever it is, and him and David are able to negotiate their way through that. And he's so socially insulated that when they actually finally do get around to swinging at them, he's not even a target. He's not even one of the votes. And then they get, he makes it to merge. He's in a majority at merge. And then when David gets taken out, at that point, you'd expect him to be in a rough spot. But he actually ends up essentially the swing vote for about like another 4 votes from there. He's the one essentially dictating who goes home from the position in the middle. So he is, like, despite starting in and ending up just by chance in really awkward spots, he manages to mostly socially just get through and somehow end up in incredible positions at each time. And that's a really big thing that everyone talks about for Luke, is that just by all accounts, his social game is really very strong. And that, I guess, is one of the big difference between Luke and I as chaotic game players is that his social game, by all accounts, is just incredible. Is that he's just amazing to have around. He's great for, like, getting food. He's great for helping around camp. And he just seems like a very, like, lovable larrikin guy. And I do think as well on that, if you look at the tribe dynamics for Australia, you have a lot of these people who are quite scary game players, right? You've got your Georges, you've got your Davids, you've got your Kirbys, you've got your Shawnees, these people who you look at and you're like, oh my God, these people are dangerous gamers. Like, these guys are intense. And I do think that there is a bit of potential for Luke to kind of play up the larrikin persona and just kind of slide under the radar for a little bit, where even though everyone knows he's a strong player, when you've got just this guy who's kind of being a bit silly around camp, and you've got then David and George and Kirby and all of these very, like, obvious big threats, you could see a world in which he just kind of, like, slides through under the radar.
Yeah, I could see that, because I think that there's almost like something, like, obviously Tony now is such a huge threat as a 2-time winner, but I think Tony has a bit of this quality where you get blinded by the ridiculousness and the fun, and you don't realize, like, that is a really good player. Like, there are almost no notes. I think there are no notes on the 2019 season. We can talk about 2017 after, now that we're going in this order, but the 2019 season, I think you'd look at, like, everything that goes wrong is out of his hands, and then everything that goes right is, like, a credit to him. Like, again, like, as we've kind of talked about structurally at the very beginning, he's not in the athlete alliance. He's not an athlete, okay, so that's, maybe make different decisions before going on Australian Survivor, because there were so many seasons in a row of athlete alliances, but that's not in him. Peeling it back, like getting Ross over and Abby over, and then, like, making this great new alliance that's going to win out, that's a credit to him. Then a bad swap, that's not on him. He gets his way out of that, and then Sean swaps over, and that wasn't, and Sean's targeting them. That was Dave's fault. Okay. So that's not on him. Dave going, none of that's on him. But then recovering from that, as I've said, to have those different groups, to be the swing vote so much, to do that move at the final 5, all the credit to him. And then at the very end, yes, he's a big threat. So is there an issue with threat management? I guess, but again, like he has this returney aspect, and he's so likable,
I don't think there's much innately there anyway.
And I think a big thing which we'll talk about is his story. His family story, which again, he can't even hide because it's his second season, when he has a daughter who's just been born, who is quite sick at the time. He has 2 sons with autism. Like, no one wanted to sit next to the story, and he can't change that about himself. And he just was that big a threat. He protected it as much as he could, being knowingly Luke, who he, again, on his second season, that he couldn't hide. And he did as well as he could. So when I look at what went wrong, it feels very situational, or like you put it on other people. When I look at what went right, he just did so much well. And again, these are skills that are going to take him into a Big Brother win, I assume. Have you not seen that season? But, that are going to take him to do so well in the traders. Like, I do agree with you that it got a lot more refined. And the like pure chaos and like the things we agree and disagree with on his first season, we haven't really seen that for like 8 years at this point, in the way that I kind of see him as a reality TV contestant.
Yeah, and what you were saying earlier about Tony being less threatening, like coming off as less threatening sometimes, just because of his personality. I experienced that a lot on my season, right? Like I had that where I was just seen as this like really chaotic, crazy person, and so for a lot of the game, no one really took me that seriously, which is great. And you see it with a lot of like very strong. I think of like Jam Jam over from like Survivor 44 as a great example. But there's so many of these like really big personalities, Survivor winners or very strong Survivor players who, because they're like that very genuinely strong gameplay is kind of covered by like quirky sort of persona, are able to just slide under the radar because no one takes them that seriously. And especially on a tribe of very dominant personalities like like Australia is, you could really see him just sliding into the background for a bit and letting, say, Kirby and Dave fight, or George and Dave, or Shonny and I don't know, these big personalities clash, and him just ending up becoming one of the power brokers of the tribe, just sliding between as he wants. And that's before you even count how well positioned he is going into the Australia tribe.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, I've always seen Luke as one of the absolute best players in Australian Survivor. When I look back at his first season, now that we're going backwards, there are more holes there than I kind of remembered. That he wants control early. He doesn't really have control early. Like Henry very much does. Henry makes an unforced error to go to the other tribe and leave his allies vulnerable. Luke capitalizes on that, finally gets his control, takes out some of the allies. But it's a more up and down season where, again, like he starts in a trickier spot. Obviously, he's teamed up with Jericho early, and they're this dynamic duo. And then, through like the swap, I think he has a lot more control, but he gets a favorable swap. They see he gets a pretty good swap. Yeah, he takes out AK, and AK's been like really screwed over by Tara not being voted out. It was like an outrage at the time, and she and Annalise went over. He used that information. He made connections. And then at the merge, he makes some great moves. He takes out Henry. That was a big one. He takes out Tessa, which we can talk about in the 3-2-2-2. But he really kind of loses all power there. And then we'll talk about it with his relationship with Sarah. But Sarah's going to go, and then he's going to go, and he never wrestles that power back. So, when you look back at his first season, maybe this is where we look at the chaos above the decision-making, present company excluded, of course, I'm talking about it. I'm just saying maybe that's where we look at, some of that chaos. Is that how you see it as well?
Yeah. And definitely, I think the swap really, a very favorable swap really masked over what was a questionable game. Like, his social game was great in 2017, but definitely that urge to have control was a lot more present, where he had a very clear, and you can see it with his relationship with Sarah through a lot of the season, where what they do sort their stuff out eventually, and they do amazingly in the early merge period once they're working together. But up until then, the way his kind of attitude towards how he's dealing with Sarah is very kind of classic Boston Rob, you're with me or you're against me. And it's a style of gameplay that if you're up against decent players just isn't ever going to work. And I think he was extremely lucky that just the way the swap worked out, he just had like as you said, the people from the other tribe, being the Summertown people, were completely fractured. And so there was no possibility of mounting any sort of defense. And he had a whole heap of people from his tribe that were loyal to him. He got to keep pretty much all of his loyal soldiers. And then the Summertowns that came over were not going to do anything. So he was just in full control there. And then once you hit that merge period, like he does very well in the early merge to take out some really important targets, like when he takes out Jared and he takes out
Annalise.
Annalise, that's it. Annalise, and then takes out Henry. That's great. That's great work all through there. But
the Henry boot especially is like one of the best blindsides, I think. Like it to like
that
just
makes
to
sense.
that moment.
There is that whole question of who actually was the Henry boot.
It was a bunch of great players, but like that moment alone, everyone involved in that. Because I remember it was raining, and they basically had to just like tell them all by kind of like gesturing in the shelter because they couldn't go off and have these conversations on someone with an idol who was like the big game player of the season. Like the Henry boot is pretty special.
Yeah, it's a great vote, but there is I don't actually know how much you can put the Henry vote down to Luke as opposed to everyone at the time realized that Henry was the biggest player. Like I remember because I was rewatching some stuff from 2017 as prep, and there's this just hilarious bit where it's just one by one all of the players going, "This is why the Henry vote was my move" and whatnot. He was already starting to lose power at the Henry vote because you can already see that came about from actually a lot of other people's connections throughout the tribe, and especially this bond between like Tessa and Michelle, and then takes out Tessa in this glorious, incredibly like beautiful to watch 3-2-2-2. One of my favorite votes in the history of Survivor, but objectively a disaster of a mistake that completely blows up like his spot within the tribe. The next two to go are Sarah, who's his second closest ally, and then him. And he has no power in either of those moves. So yeah, there is definitely clearly a lack of finesse with the strategy that goes into there. And there's something about, as much as like a 3-2-2-2 is great, coming over the top of a vote where you've got 6 other people voting in other directions with 3. And I know I'm the biggest hypocrite to be saying this, but coming over with a 3-person to vote someone out in a spot like that is not really the smartest move there.
Yeah, I think, well, that was my first ever recap. That was my second ever podcast. I went on with Nick to recap what ended up being a tragic week. The Tessa, Sarah, Luke back-to-back votes. And so there was no point even talking about how ill-advised the 3-2-2-2 was because it had already played out before the recap. Like that was the first vote of the week. And then 2 of the 3 in the 3-2-2-2 who had won the vote in Sarah and Luke, who we now have back, were voted out. I remember we talked at the time about, I think it was like the worst percentage of votes to win with, obviously not on idol plays or anything like that, but like the smallest plurality at the time. And we talked about like the Borneo merge and everything like that. But we were like, you've come back to a majority against you. And it was obvious because it had already happened. But yeah, it was the kind of thing where I think Luke on his first season, there was a lot of like, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, totally.
And I think there was, I mean, it was fun. It was not on purpose. Like they didn't know it was going to be a 3-2-2-2 like that. It was like pure chaos. But they had like the strongest, like tightest group of that 3 who could like get things together to make it work. They win the vote. Yeah. And then Sarah immediately goes home and Luke immediately goes home. And it was, I think what was so bad about it was because they knew that they were the really big threats. Like they knew they needed, like Luke and Sarah, like especially like needed shields. Couldn't really poke their head up with this crazy, like historic 3-2-2-2 vote because they were already already had such targets on their back, and then there was just nowhere to hide for them, and like the lower threat as they were seen.
And they take out in the previous 2 votes, they've taken out 2 of the biggest threats in the game. Like they've gone Henry and then they've gone Tessa, and that's pretty much the 2 biggest threats in the game that they've taken out in positions where they've had a lot of control. And I think that like the whole shield thing, I think, is the really big difference between 2019 and 2017. It was really noticeable in 2017, and in fact he talked about it a lot in confessionals when I was rewatching. He's like, Luke is obsessed with getting people's like scalps, getting their names on his like on his hit list, right? Like he wants to get out AK because it's a great person to get out. He wants to get out Henry because he's going for the big kill. He wants to get like what's her name, Sam Gash. He wants to take out because she's like the big person. He's always gunning for whoever's at the top of the tribe. But I do think that he, like in 2019, it's a lot more noticeable, his ability to keep those bigger threats around and utilize them as shields, which is much more important for. And it's so the way that David goes home is the best example of that, right? Because he should, like, in theory, you're looking at the season and Luke's made it to final 10, final 9, whatever, and he's still in the game and he's ran the game so far. He should be the biggest threat in the game, but he's got David next to him, who's actually an even bigger threat, and funnily enough has David next to him coming into Australia versus the world as well. But this does seem, with the amount of like big threats on both the Australia tribe and the world tribe, that this is the best kind of situation for him, because it's the one world where his both innate threat level and also his tendency to want to play that kind of big game may not necessarily be as much of an issue as it would historically, because instead you've just got all these big players. And the other thing I want to add as well is that I do suspect that Australia versus the world will probably be a lot more social than strategic. Like, Australian Survivor has 24 people. And what that means is that you've got a lot of room to maneuver. And so I think Australian Survivor, especially when compared to like modern US Survivor, I think Australian Survivor is very strategic, because you've just got all of these numbers, kind of all these voting blocks moving in different directions. And even when you've got like one big alliance, two big alliance, you've still got these like blocks within them that you still have to kind of navigate effectively. Australia versus the world is kind of a bit more modern US Survivor-esque in that there's a lot less people. And what that means is less room to maneuver and much more about the bonds that you build as opposed to the moves that you make. And I think that will actually potentially benefit him, as opposed to someone like a George, for example, who is probably a lot more strategic than social. You don't have that tactical flexibility. You either get along with this person, or that's one of your 6 numbers on your tribe that you can't work with. And I do think that definitely benefits Luke coming into this, because definitely the social side of his game is the strength, and the strategic side, while very good, especially in 2019, definitely is not refined to the same level as the social game, which is by all accounts phenomenal.
But I do wonder if on AUV World, because it's such a short season and like so short that it's not about like, you know, people are out the door before you've even really made the bonds with them, unless you've had them for many years, which in many ways Luke has. And we'll talk about those connections. But I do wonder if it'll be more like big game hunting kind of early and taking like real shots, because so much of the game will be spent actually playing it rather than like having real time to connect because it's so short. And I do think that maybe then Luke could lean into those less refined tendencies of like getting out the big votes and stuff. But I do think that the discrepancy that you've spoken about from 2017 to 2019 is very good. And it's not just like one season to the other. I think it shows like a real evolution and a real growth that is very, very considered. Like, you know, in 2017, you said he was looking for scalps. I remember there were articles that it was like he was wearing the clothes of his victims, and there were articles calling him like a serial killer, and that was it.
Oh, imagine doing that.
Yeah.
What kind of crazy person would wear the clothes of someone they voted out?
Imagine it being a headline, which was like this serial killer tendency. But their social game was still so good, even though he was being compared to a serial killer. But yeah, in 2019, it was a lot more about like delayed gratification. It wasn't like, you know, Dave's out, I'm like immediately getting revenge. It was like, hey, what's the best thing for my game? And he finds like shelter with the champions for a bit. And then like he does get revenge on like Janine, definitely, but like in a way that makes sense and like building his game through those votes. So I think that we have seen that growth. I think that speaks to the player that he's become. I mean, he has watched a lot of Survivor since then. I mean, coming from someone who didn't really know the show, was like such clear casting again, because he's like a magnetic screen presence, you know, and had watched the Tony YouTube clips to come in to make a Spy Shack, which is such an interesting connection now, which we'll definitely talk about. I think that Luke actually on this Australia tribe is one of the most well-read Australian Survivor players on the tribe, like who knows people. And I've said this is a cast of people who will not really know other people. I mean, George has seen a lot. I think Sarah would have done her research and has certainly watched like Australian Survivor. Luke has seen more than you think. Like Luke definitely has watched Australian Survivor. He's covered 2 seasons on Talking Tribal. So he kind of got into that commentator aspect. He was my guest. This is a fun fact. This is going back. He was my guest on the penultimate episode of Lisa's season. So I don't know how much he remembers about Lisa, but I know he definitely watched her and talked about her game. So I think other than maybe George, I think he, like, let alone he knows all these players personally, many of them he does, I think he'll actually know the players. And I think he's gotten into a more strategic and like kind of strategically conscious way of thinking about the game, certainly since his first time playing. Because there were gaps the first time. It was more kind of chaos for chaos's sake. And I think we've seen him really be able to pull that back. And like even in something like the Traders, what he was really doing was he had great reads. He and Annabelle were like the voice of the people in a very frustrating season. They knew who the traders were, but they were like sidling up to the traders to stick around with them, which is very much like the best thing the faithfuls can do. You just have very little control of the faithful. So I don't blame him for going out there. I just think it was a very frustrating season. But again, we see those reads. But again, we see the delayed gratification. It's not as much Luke from 2017 who might be like, that guy's a traitor. I'm going to get the win, get him out, and then get murdered the next day. There was a lot more thought given to it. And that is a Luke that we're going to see, I think, go into AUV World.
Yeah, it's so funny that you talk about that, because if you look at the Australia tribe, it is definitely like it's people there are some famous non-Survivor watchers on there, right? Like Kirby, not a Survivor fan, didn't watch like Survivor going in, wanted to go in kind of dry. Shawnee, by my understanding, is not like a super big Survivor watcher of any kind. No. Janine, I can't imagine is like super massive like diehard Survivor fan. And so yeah, Luke, you would know better than I would, but is definitely one of the people who's best positioned as far as Survivor knowledge, and even just knowing who the other people are on the other tribe, right? Because you've got all the US players, and then who knows whether he's done his research into some of these other international players. But it's not like anyone else over on the Australia tribe is going to have any sort of advantage over him, except maybe Sarah or George, depending on how much work that they've done. Yeah. Do you want to talk about the positioning on the tribe? Because I think that's one of the most interesting parts of interesting things with how Luke's set up here.
Yeah, I mean, let's definitely talk about it. I've said Dave is like the center of everything, because Dave has the cross-tribal connection through to Parvati, and then that has Sari. And like the relationship with Parvati is so recent for Dave from Don D, and was so close. And Luke doesn't have that kind of connection to the other tribe other than through Dave. But Luke is possibly the best connected on the Australia tribe. Like, just to run it down, we'll talk about his relationship with Sarah, but as you kind of said, on 2017, it was a very brother-sister relationship, and she was our guest with Talking Tribal. I'm sure they have a great relationship. Like, they fought like brother and sister, but they would make up and like make moves together. And again, like, it wasn't his fault that she got voted out. I think the biggest thing for them was after the swap, they were like very much coming for each other. And then there was like a mutiny and Pete left, and then they were like fighting over Odette's vote, and then instead like came together and voted out Odette in like a swing vote type of way, which kind of, I think, perfectly encapsulates that relationship. Like, they'd be like coming for each other, then be like, actually, knives down, weapons down, let's work together. And then they would work together very, very well. I think it's a very positive relationship. His relationship with Janine, like, she got one over on him on getting out Dave. He did get her voted out. But honestly, what I remember with Janine is how much she loved him. Like, I remember her talking about being on the show and getting to meet someone like Luke, who she wouldn't usually get to meet. I think they have a very, very strong relationship. I think Dave is like a brother to him, never had to betray Dave. Incredibly, incredibly close. He knows Kirby from before the game. They were on a podcast together a few months before the game, worked together before she even played, and she didn't know anything about Survivor other than like her friend Luke had been on it a couple of times. Is that it? Yeah, that's 5 people in the tribe, including him. So that's 5 and 7. That's pretty good.
Yeah, totally. And I do think that with how short this season is going to be, like, the pre-game relationships are going to play a part. And the main thing is that all of his pre-game relationships, he hasn't soured any of them, right? Like, there's no one on the tribe that's going to just be, I want Luke out because he voted me out of here, or he annoyed me on the other season, or whatever. It's people who he's got a really good relationship with. And it's people who he's already got a great social game. And then he's just going to be dropped into this season. It's going to be all hell to leather immediately. Because it's going to be such a fast game. And he's just got these relationships already built up, versus someone like George, for example, or a Kirby, who don't know as many people in the season. They're going to have to build those relationships organically. And so, yeah, it is. You could very much see a world in which Luke becomes one of the key kind of power brokers of the tribe. And then you add on to that fact as well that you've got these other really big personalities on the tribe. Definitely, obviously, George and Dave are the two obvious ones, right? Like, George and Dave are the two big dogs in every room. They want to like run in there. They're going to pull their dick out on the table, and they want to run things from the start. And so it's very he's going to be in a great spot to kind of dictate, are we going for the hyenas or are we going for the lions, basically? Because I don't think he's necessarily going to be seen as a lion compared to like some of the other people, even someone like Kirby. Like the thing is, Kirby, she's only played one time, and her kind of aura the one time that she played was so big that I do feel like there's the potential that she's going to come in here with a really big target on her back. She's also someone who very much, while she's kind of an understated persona, from a strategic point of view, she also enjoyed being the top dog, right? Like Kirby was someone who always was kind of seeking control. And anytime anyone else kind of stuck their head up, she was very excited to like kind of cut them down on her season. So you've got these people that are really big kind of control freaks in like David, Kirby, George. And then that potentially leaves Luke in the spot where he's actually going to be the one deciding where the votes go, especially since he's got this great relationship with Sarah already. He's got this great relationship with Janine already. So that you can very much see a world where he's going to be kind of dictating where the movements go as these other big dogs are kind of fighting each other.
Yeah, you know what, the tribe of egomaniacs when like Luke is going to be the wallflower. I mean, this is like one of the biggest personalities you will find in reality TV, and even so, maybe he makes the top 50 of this tribe, maybe. I think that, it's interesting. You could look at Kirby's first season, and that's kind of like Luke's first season. Like, I feel like it wasn't as refined. Yeah. Maybe that's what Kirby will go on to do. She also wasn't a fan. She also like was learning it on the fly, but with these really innate, mostly social skills for the game. And we just haven't got to see those kind of return, reality TV seasons from her to see how it's refined. But I do think it's so interesting because Kirby, we refer to as a Tony type. Luke, we refer to as a Tony type. This season also has Tony. George, we refer to as a Tony type. There are all the Tonys on the season. I would love to see him get across to work with someone or to just meet Tony, be like, you were my racer for my first season. I brought the Spy Shack to Australia, and to be fair, maybe he did credit Tony, and it didn't make the edit, but that was credited to Luke in Australia for a long time. So it's like the two meetings of the Spy Shack, which I would love to see. But I do think he's very well set up in this tribe. I think that for someone like Dave, even though he has a good relationship with Janine, he might always go back to the revenge narrative. They both might do that. Whereas while Janine should narratively want revenge on Luke's storyline isn't revengey. It doesn't really work for his character type. I can't imagine that being the thing, whereas Dave really drives something like that. So I don't think he has to be worried. I think those relationships are genuinely good. And I do think he will be underestimated. I mean, I've always thought Luke is an amazing player. And even so, even in doing this research, I'm like, he's even better than I remembered. And I wasn't even giving him that credit. And I've always been very, very high on him as a player. So I do think he could get, a little bit left behind for people or not really seen. He hasn't played Australian Survivor since 2019. Other players are more recent, have had more recent wins or even games like Kirby. So yeah, I think from a personality standpoint and from a gameplay standpoint, he could fly under the radar, which is a crazy thing to say for Luke, but that is the makeup of the cast that we have in front of us.
Yeah. I'm really interested to see how he interacts with some of the international guys once they swap or they merge, or I don't know, whatever their plan is there. One thing that is interesting, I've thought a lot about, obviously, this season, and I think one of the really big drivers of the season, just the strategy of the season and kind of how it all progresses, is going to be ego. You've just got I'm sure. I mean, in general, reality TV people have a big ego. Yes. A lot of the people from my season, myself included, have really big egos. And then you've got these people who are essentially the best of the best. They have proven that they are the best of the best. And so you've got these massive ego personalities, both on the Australia tribe and the world tribe. And it's interesting to me because I was thinking about being at the end. Do you think Luke is scared to go up against Tony at Final 2, or Dave at Final 2, or George at Final 2, or whatever? I don't think so. Oftentimes in returning seasons, you see a lot of it driven by fear. This person's a big threat. Let's get him out. This person. But I don't see Luke as being like that, right? And if he's also kind of avoiding the scalp thing, just I want this name for the sake of it, I think he's really well positioned where he will be exactly where you want to be, which is you want to be the second biggest threat or the third biggest threat, right? That's exactly where you want to be. And because he is not afraid to go to Final 4, Final 5, Final 3, deep into the game with the person who is the biggest threat in the game. And I think the makeup of this tribe is kind of perfect for him to do it. And you could even see a world where swap hits or merge hits, and you have George or David or whoever, like the real, like the top dog of the Australia tribe, is coming into merge and clashing with Parvati or Rob or Tony or whoever has been running the world tribe. And then he just manages to kind of sneak and snake his way through. And again, once the dust settles and you've got final 5, final 4, he's the number 1 or number 2 threat kind of remaining.
Yeah, I do think he can go up against pretty much anyone at the end. I have said that other people, even if they play a phenomenal game, who have less of a reputation, should avoid the Daves and the Tonys, just from like, in 2 weeks, how drastically are you changing perception where you're going to beat them even if you played way better than them? You know, there's no way that Tonys are good in 2 weeks of the show. And many of these players that's true for. But I think that Luke, firstly, does have a good reputation where it might be that perfect middle ground in this incredibly high season where it would usually be the highest by far, but it's just well positioned. So he still has a great reputation in that. Luke also has an amazing story. I mean, we need to talk about this stuff off screen as well. I mean, we're saying he can fly under the radar, but Luke has things no one else has. When Luke got voted out by Pia at the Final Four, I mean, it wasn't just Pia. Pia got a lot of death threats, but that probably speaks to a lot of the way we look at women playing reality TV. But people were so upset. I have never seen anything like when Luke got voted out of 2019 in 4th place from on the island, like the devastation.
Pia. Just Pia alone, like just literally crying.
Woman getting the death threats when she's like clearly so upset having to make this move because he's definitely going to win. And then the fans, let alone the death threats, they raised, for the people who don't know, over the prize money. They raised $550,000, I think, in a matter of days in a GoFundMe for Luke. And they didn't stop there. It had to be shut down because people kept donating money to Luke. Luke has this incredible story. I think he just posted that his daughter just got out of hospital after a nearly year-long stay. I think a lot of this was like kind of just after maybe he was filming. His daughter has cystic fibrosis. Again, like a lot of this might be after filming, but he's always going to have that story. He's always going to have something that people are going to want to vote for off screen. I think Luke is very much the original fan favorite. He came back in 2019 as the first returnee in Australian Survivor as the people's champion. Ironically, he has also had controversies off screen, which people can look into, which I certainly don't condone, like some of the, maybe political opinions or things that were said. So that part is unfortunate. I think as a TV character and what people have, known about him and loved about him, and like in my personal dealings with him, like there's a lot of love there for Luke. I think it maybe was a little bit glossed over because Dave then came on the scene and was this huge character. George has come on since he's played so many times. There are these big characters, again, present company included, and Luke played so long ago when you think about that. But I think people forget about what Luke has been in the franchise, how much people love him on the island, how much fans have really loved him, and how much are people going to think that in that time he won Big Brother? Are people really going to be thinking about that? Because he did do that. It is important, but maybe it gets glossed over a little bit more than like George running around 2 full seasons of the show and Kirby playing so recently, and that's just the beginning of the list for this cast.
Yeah. I think as well, you look at some of the other Australians on there, and people like George and Dave, obviously the obvious examples of the big personalities who were very, very popular, but they were both very divisive. And before kind of the controversies and whatnot, Luke was basically just widespread love. Like there were not people who didn't enjoy watching Luke, versus like George and David were obviously much more kind of divisive figures. And so you're right in that he does have the narrative of his side on his side, definitely. The problem is that on the flip side of that, he's not going to be able to hide that narrative, right? That's not something that you can threat manage your way away. So a lot of that will come down to the season, right? And what people are valuing, what the jury's valuing. And you could definitely see, though, if he plays a more under the radar strategic game, you could see someone who's playing a very dominant strategic game taking him to the end, because he thinks like this is something that was really big on our season, which is you need to find someone who, actually Kalen talked about it in his final tribal. You need to find someone who is sure that they're going to beat you and you're sure that you're going to beat them, right? And with what will probably be a different winning pitch to, say, the strategically dominant, like, number one threat of the season, like, Luke may think he has a differentiated pitch to the jury that will be able to beat that big threat. And so he can carry that big threat through, maybe try and cut them at 4 or 3. And then even if he fails to cut them at 4 or 3, still have a really good shot at beating them at the end, which is a fantastic spot to be in, right? That was kind of what I was trying to do for a lot of my season, which is like carry number one threat to the end and then cut them at the end. And then even if you end up against them at final 2, like, you've got, say, 30-40% chance. Like, you could very much see Luke being comfortable with that and just riding under the wing, playing a lower key strategic game than he maybe would be inclined to, and letting someone else get all the attention and just thinking, I got the story that's going to beat them, right? Because we know George and Brains versus Brawns won. The big dominant strategic player doesn't always win. It's all about the jury. And while I do think that this jury will probably value strategy a lot more than story, like, you don't know. You don't know, and he might not know. So there's a world where he thinks that's going to happen. He takes a big threat to final 2, thinking he can beat them with, like, his personality and charm and whatnot, and then, like, gets beaten at final 2 by, I don't know, Tony or someone, or like Dave or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very high on Luke. I'm only higher on him coming into the season. The final tribal council aspect of it, I do find interesting because I think from kind of both sides of it, firstly, we may be underestimating how much of an innate threat he is because, yes, there are these really big personalities. Yes, he is happy to kind of be more of the beta than he was very early on when he was playing, but you know, he's the only person who has had hundreds of thousands of dollars raised for him from just fan love. People will remember that. People might consider the fact that he won reality TV when not a lot of people on the Australian cast did, right? Is it just Dave, who's now won 2 things that one of them they might not know about? So I think maybe people will look at it. People might look at the story more than we're considering, as they really did in 2019, which is why he was so limited in the end game. And they might not want us to next to him, even though there are really big characters. It might be harder to diminish that than we're saying. And then I also kind of wonder what Luke would be like in a final tribal council. I mean, look, I've been with him on Talking Tribal and he speaks about the game well. We also know that he can put his foot in his mouth. So I don't know that it's something that not that these are very comparable situations, but I don't know that I can say that I think that he'll really thrive in that environment. So I think that there are some cons there, but certainly in the research I did for this podcast and going back to like thinking about Luke's game and in talking about it with you, like, you've come in hyped and now I'm like, damn, Luke is like a good winner pick because I think I forgot how good he is. And he also is so well positioned. Maybe too well positioned. Like, maybe people will be like, clearly he's so well positioned. But
let me tell you the other thing I really like about his positioning, right? Something that happened on my season is that the people, AJ and I, were the big obvious, like, oh, they're these big strategic players. But we're so like over the top that everyone's like, okay, but they're not actually going to win. So who are the real threats to win, right? And that's where you get like Laura, Logan, Karen, Kate, these guys, Kristen, these guys getting targeted because it's, okay, Myles and AJ aren't going to win. These are the people that are going to win, right? These are the people that are kind of playing under the radar, but playing still very strong games. And so you've got these really big characters that, as we've established, he's probably just one step down from, as far as like big threat level, which is crazy. Yeah, which is crazy. But then
because that's like the step down, like in Survivor history. Like, these are like the Mount Rushmore of characters in like Australian Survivor. And like, yes, okay, fine, he's like 3rd ever. But he's that makes him the 3rd biggest male character on the last male character on this tribe, because he's the 3rd in Australian Survivor franchise history. So that's crazy.
But then, and you get this especially on the Australia tribe. I think the world tribe, the dynamics are a little bit different, but on the Australia tribe, you have these, then the sleeper threats, right? Like, there's probably less, I'm throwing Kirby into the big threat basket just because she played recently and she was the biggest player. And also she has this kind of like real natural, obvious charisma to her that I think will make her a quite obvious big threat quite early on. But you've got the Shawnees and then the Janine and Sarah, who I think a lot of people will be looking at as, oh, they're just going to slide through. And George loves to do this, right? Like, George famously did this with Fraser, where if there's someone who's just kind of sliding through, take him out. They're taking up a spot later on in the game. And so if we do get that kind of lions and hyenas kind of situation, while Luke, I think, is a bit insulated from being one of the really big dominant threats, so he's not going to be one of the lions, but he's also not really one of the hyenas either. Like, he's in this just really unique spot where he's just kind of the weird crazy guy on the tribe potentially, who is like not as threatening as the big threats, but also not as low key as all the low key people, which could be really good, because you could totally see a world where Dave and George immediately come together and go, hey, let's work together here because we're going to be the obvious targets. They pull in. I can't actually
imagine that.
No, but let's just play for a bit. Like, actually, especially though, once you hit merge, right? Like, once you hit merge, you could see a world where maybe on the world tribe you've got like Parvati and Suri and Tony. You've got a couple of them have survived, and then you've got a couple of the international people who will be the more low key characters there that have survived. And then similarly, you've got the similar breakdown on the Australia tribe, where you got maybe a couple of the bigger targets and a couple of the more low key, and then like in Winners at War, you get all the big targets come together and just start like sniping off the under the radar people. I think regardless of whether people are going for the big targets or going for the under the radar people, he's not really obviously in either basket, right? Like, he's got a little bit of breathing room in both directions, which is a really good spot to be.
You are so right. I mean, Luke is coming in he's in a very good spot here. Like, he's a lion, but he's one just because of the caliber of characters that we have here, just because of maybe the ego and the names. He's just a little bit less, and I feel like he has so many shields.
Like the smallest lion. He's like a smaller lion.
He's like a little lion cub. He's like little Simba, and I think at the point where they've taken out all his shields, they'll have run out of time, and he'll still be there with an amazing story. Now, again, are we underestimating the fact that we're saying this about Luke, and Luke is still Luke? And he has like all these things, but I think, him playing so long ago in the spectrum of where we are in Australian Survivor. And I think people thinking a little bit less about Big Brother and thinking more about other characters. I do think, wow, I'm coming in we've convinced me. I don't know how many of our listeners we've convinced, but Luke is a good winner pick.
I want to add one more thing, actually, that I literally just thought of just now.
He's going to win already.
Well, I do think that look at the challenge competitors on this season. This season, it's really fascinating. There's this just complete divide in challenge competitiveness. You've got some incredibly strong challenge competitors, obviously Dave, Luke, Parvati, and then my understanding is that Cassandra and
she's very good at endurance.
Tommy are both very good at challenges. But then, like, if you can take out a couple of them, you're up against people like Janine and George and Suri, and even like Tony. I know Tony won a couple of challenges on Winners at War, but I really don't think Tony suits the Australian Survivor challenges that well. Like, the American Survivor challenges just have that a bit less physicality to them. And so if you're looking at there is a world, like, he did it in 2019. He's proven that he's a very strong challenge competitor, and he's a versatile challenge competitor, right? Because you do find like some of those, like, you've got the big guys who suck at endurance and also suck at the bigger thing is the technical. Everyone talks about the endurance challenges on Australian Survivor. Australian Survivor actually has a lot of like those little technical challenges, right? Like, just, the stacking of the blocks or balancing on this, the da-da-da-da-da. And he's great at those. He's fantastic at those. So he's very well positioned for those big physical challenges. He's very well positioned for those like little technical challenges. And even endurance, right? Like, sure, you do have your Parvati's, Cassandra there, but like, and Shawnee probably falls into that category for Australian endurance threats as well. But there's not a lot of people, there's not that much challenge competition here. And so if he ends up in an end game where you've still got Janine around, you've got George around, you've got Suri around, and then it's going to be a really thin field for challenges. And so And this applies to a couple of them, right? Like, I think Dave is the same. If Dave ends up in an end game where he's up against, because I think Dave is actually probably a stronger challenge competitor than Luke. But if he ends up in this kind of end game with a lot of weaker challenge threats around, he potentially could go on a 3, 4, 5 challenge run. And I think Luke has the potential to do the same. He's already done it. We've seen he's already done it.
Yeah, he won like I think 4 challenges in 2019. But the thing about Luke that's so crazy is that you don't think of him as like a challenge beast, whereas like
No.
you think of or look at like a Rob Bentley, and it's pretty clear. You don't even need to have seen the season. You're like, and again, maybe not even as well suited to the post merge of Australian Survivor, but you can just plainly see it, and even with like a Dave. But I don't think you think about it as much with Luke. Unless you know the stats, and to be fair, like Janine was there, Dave was there, Dave's working with him, I think, pretty closely. But yeah, you might not think about it as much. And it's the same with his strategy. Like he is a very strategically switched on player, but again, that gets masked. So look, Myles, I mean, everyone should have someone who advocates for them the way you've advocated for Luke. I can't believe he won Australia Survivor V World, but it's done. Like, no notes. Like he's coming in such a good spot. But yeah, I mean, look, you sold me. I sold me. I don't know how many people we sold, but like this is a very, very good setup for Luke.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what it is just at all of these things that we've talked about, he's just kind of like in the upper middle for all of them, which on Survivor is exactly where you want to be. You don't want to be the biggest physical threat. You don't want to be the biggest social threat. You don't want to be the biggest strategic threat. You don't want to like stand out in any of those individual ways. But to be just kind of this third best, fourth best at all of those things, like that's a really great spot to be. Yeah. And if you're looking across both on as the Australia tribe and across both tribes, that's kind of where he is. The only thing that I would worry about with him is I think the biggest worry is that people see it, especially regarding the connections thing. Like if some people put together like, oh, Luke is especially if they hit like a tribe swap, right? Or a merge, and you're looking at, okay, you've got this Australia alliance, you've got the World Alliance, let's say the World Alliance is up in numbers against the Australia Alliance. They're looking at that Australia Alliance and we're like, how do you fracture that Australia Alliance? Well, you've got everyone has these connections to Luke. You take out Luke. That's the main thing that I worry about, is that if you are on the world, or even if you're on the Australia tribe, right, and you've got, say, I could see someone like Sarah doing this, right, where she's close with Luke, but looks around and goes, wait a minute, everyone else here is close with Luke and everyone's working with Luke. So I'm going to jump over to work with George, I guess. Like in my implicit mind, the Australia tribe just ends up like George versus everyone else, because he's kind of just, yeah. But there's a world where, say, like Sarah, Shawnee, and Kirby end up jumping over with George and they take out Luke because he's the most well-connected or something. I don't know. I'm just, but that would be the thing that I'd be the most worried about, because I know, like, if I were going out there, right, I'd be clocking, okay, like, regardless of worrying about like social or physical or strategic threat, I'd be looking at Luke and being like, okay, you've worked with this person, you've been with this person, you've been in this person. Okay, so you say I'm working with you, but everyone thinks you're working with me. That's scary. I don't like that. Yeah, but that is my biggest worry for him. But if no one kind of picks up on that, or no one clocks out, or no one's worried about that, then he is just like in a really great spot.
Yeah, George's spot is as bad as Luke's is good. I don't know how
George's spot is horrendous.
Every podcast, we're just like, George is not in a good spot. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, when we say he's third or fourth best, it's like his connections are very obvious and his story is the best. His story is what and if that's what people are worried about, if that's something people will care about.
Do you not think that someone like Tony and Suri and like
Suri, yes, always Suri, but no. Like Luke has a very...
even someone like David, right? Like, sure, Luke has the story from like sympathy perspective, but David, if he won, would be the first 2-time winner, right?
Yeah,
like. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people, especially on the World Tribe, who are like fans of the game, and there are a couple on the Australia Tribe. Right, you get an opportunity to make Parvati a 2-time winner, or just to make Suri the first-time winner. Right, like I do still think there are people who, from a story perspective, Tony could be the first 3-time winner. Right, like there are people who have stories that are still like competitive with Luke's. Luke's definitely has the sympathy side of things, but from a story narrative that you want to win, and you mentioned this before. I agree. I do think that Final Tribal, like 90%, comes down to narrative. But if you're looking at it from a narrative perspective, I think there are narratives that people would rather reward, and especially against because this is going to be a bunch of gamers, right? Rewarding gameplay or gameplay adjacent stuff, i.e. Suri is an incredible player who's never won, or Tony's a 2-time winner, could be the first 3-time winner, versus we're giving you the money because you're nice and we like you.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, do we even know how much money they're winning on this? Every podcast I ask, I feel like no one knows how much money. So it'd be funny to be like, you win on story, like your family really needs
JLP's salary. They're earning they're making JLP's salary with the money.
I mean, it might not be that much money. I mean, it's an exhibition match, so maybe the story matters less. Like maybe it really is about the win, and maybe it's not. And to be fair, like Luke already was given by the public hundreds of thousands. Like this is what Luke won $1 million for being popular. Luke did that without there even being like a function for that. Like it was just raised by the public. So his family has won an amount of money for that. It's true. If any cast is not going to care as much about the story, I do think this is the one. It's certainly something that Luke can at least sell to them at, to try and protect against the threat of his story that came from in 2019, whether it's true or not. It's something he could definitely use, and it may even be true. But then it becomes, okay, so are they voting on, we'd rather get the win or give someone, a story of like, oh, you're a 3-time winner, but then maybe they'll not want that. Again, as we're saying, this is a cast of egos. Maybe it's about, I don't want this person to be a 2-time winner or a 3-time winner when I'm not a winner at all. So maybe it is a strategy-based thinking more than story, but the strategy also is bad because people don't want to vote for someone Tony to be, start lapping people so many times. So I think that could go either way, but you are right that we don't even know how much money this is. Like Luke, unfortunately, will not have, I think, the draw card necessarily that his story would have given him in other seasons, but then maybe it won't be as much of a threat considering that really doomed him last time. So pros and cons. Yeah, and it depends how much money it's for, really. Because I think at any point, even if you think that you won't care about it as much, you get to the end and give that story, if it's for a significant amount of money, people might end up caring more than they think. Or maybe not. If any cast vote, it probably is.
I don't know. I mean, I had obviously only my own situation to talk about, but very much there is comparisons because our season was a season of gamers, right? Like our season was very much just like the brains diehard Survivor fans jury, right? And on our side, the money and the story. Kaylin, from a human perspective, give Kaylin the money over me every single time. That man deserves $1 million, $2 million, but he didn't like. You've got the gamer jury, unfortunately, right? Like you've got people like Zara and AJ who are very, very well off, but the jury would have probably happily given them the money over Kaylin. And I think like this is kind of comparable to that from a jury perspective. You've got all these gamers, like and to be fair, they're maybe not to the same extent because there's probably less fans. I think like our jury had a lot of like real diehard fans, while I think a lot of this cast is less fans and more just big gamers. But I still think that you have to think that it's going to be about the gameplay for them as opposed to the like sob story, who we like and whatnot. Yeah, but also I say that like who knows, because I consider myself like a gamer big fan guy, and I would have like voted. I was totally ready to vote irrationally based on who I wanted to have the money at the end.
Yeah. Well, I think what it is if any story can be people voting on story and likability, it probably is Luke. Like again, not many people can get that amount of money raised on story and likability alone. But maybe there's no story that will be the criteria for these game players. But if it is, it'll be Luke's story. So yeah.
Or best case scenario is that for Luke is that he sits next to someone like a George or a Russell for equivalent in this season, where it's someone who has played a strategic dominant game but has pissed off people and voted them out, while Luke's maybe played a more low game. But that's the scenario where the likability does genuinely become a factor with who I don't want to, even though this person we recognize played a better game, I don't want to give them the money because they've been an ass to me the whole time. I'm going to give it to Luke instead. Like, because you could see, like, let's say like Sarah ended up in that. And I love Sarah and I love her game so much. She's one of my favorite players. But in a world where she kind of slides under the radar most of the game and ends up next to, say, a George, and George has annoyed everyone, I think the jury probably still gives George the win. But if someone like a Luke, who has that, like, really amazing story, does the same thing, like, I could really see a world where he ends up taking it, right? Like, I think a lot of the time you just need something for the jury to grab onto, and having that story, like, if in a world where you're against a Russell, against a George, against a, big demon player of the season, and I think he's got that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, a lot of outs for Luke. Okay. It's looking pretty good. Yeah. Myles,
Yeah.
you've been such a good Luke expert. Thank you so much. Do you have anything else to add before, other than the amazing work you've done so far?
No, I'm just excited. I'm so excited. I had thought about this season and the different combinations and ways it could go so much. I'm very hyped.
Yeah, we're all very excited. If only we knew. Maybe by the time this drops, we'll know when it's out, and this will all be
Yeah.
redundant. But who knows? Who knows when this is dropping? Who knows when the season is dropping? We're all just it's kind of more like Luke in his first season. We're all just kind of like just doing stuff. It's less considered in this
Yeah.
preseason because it's just like a wild time. But Myles, this was great. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for all of your research and great points. Tell the people where they can find you and what you're doing.
Yeah, so if you want to find me, I'm on Instagram and TikTok. I think you can just search. There's not many Myles Kuahs out there, so I think you can just search up my name and you'll find me. I'm on Twitter as well. If you want Survivor-related stuff, like look up my Twitter. It's Myles M Kuah is the at because that's where I post more specifically Survivor stuff versus the other places I just post like random whatever I'm feeling like. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
I really like the Instagram reel, probably a TikTok as well, that you put up about 6 mattresses.
Yeah. The fact that my bedding situation was 6 single mattresses like stacked on top of each other.
Yeah. That song was really catchy. Like that was in my head for like that whole afternoon, and that was genuinely great. Like I'm like, this could be a hit. So yes, follow Myles everywhere for all of that, the Survivor and non-Survivor related stuff. This preseason is rolling on. Podcasts are coming out in some order.
Survivor 50 coming out soon as well. Like very excited for that.
Yeah. Big time to be a Survivor fan. Big time to be an Australian Survivor fan. We know globalsurvivor.com at Shannon Gates, so you don't miss any of the podcasts that are currently coming out in this preseason. And that's all I got. Myles, thank you so much. This has been such a good time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Always. And thank you to everyone for listening. Thank you to our team behind the scenes, and I will see you next time. Bye.
This is RHAP. We know reality TV.